Before a hacker breaks into your network, they have to find it. And before they exploit you, they scan you, they knock on your digital doors, they ping your IP addresses, they probe your ports, they fingerprint your operating systems, and they do it quietly, methodically, and often from addresses you'll never trace back to a real person. Here's what's interesting. The techniques they use today aren't new. Most of them were documented in detail back in 1999 in a paper written by the real Ron Gula while he was working on the Dragon Intrusion Detection System at Network Defense Consulting. So today we're going to use that paper as a foundation and build forward. We're going to cover how scanning works at every scale, from one host probing another to a botnet sweeping the entire public internet. And then we'll talk about what the recommendations from 1999 look like in the context of 2026. Let's start small. One machine, one target. When an attacker or a security researcher wants to understand a single remote host, they have a toolkit of techniques. And all of them are designed to answer the same basic question: what is running on that machine, and can I get to it? The most basic tool is the ping. You send an ICMP echo request packet to an IP address. If the host is alive and not firewalled, you get an ICMP echo reply back. Simple, effective, detectable. A single pulse goes out, and if someone is home, you get one back. But smart scanners don't stop at ping. ICMP has more than a dozen message types beyond echo. There are timestamp requests, net mask requests, and address mask queries. Most firewall administrators block ICMP echo but forget about the rest of the ICMP protocol suite. So attackers who know this can still get a response and confirm that a host is alive without ever sending a single traditional ping. Watch what happens when a non-echo ICMP request finds the gap in the rule. TCP is how most of the internet's application traffic works. It uses a three-way handshake, a SYN from the client, a SYN ACK from the server if the port is open, and a final AK to complete the connection. A basic port scan sends a SYN to each port on the target and watches what comes back. SYN ACK means the port is open, RST means the port is closed. No response, with a firewall in between, usually means the port is filtered. But there's a smarter version called a SYN scan or a half-open scan. The attacker sends the SYN, gets the SYN ACK if the port is open, and then immediately fires back a RST to kill the connection before the handshake completes. The target's operating system often never logs this. The three-way handshake was never finished. In 1999, this was a major IDS evasion technique. Some systems still handle it poorly today. Beyond ports, TCP can also reveal something about the underlying operating system. Different operating systems implement their TCP stack slightly differently. Different initial sequence numbers, different window sizes, different handling of unusual flag combinations. Tools like Nmap fire carefully crafted packets with flag combinations that don't occur in normal traffic, if in plus SYN simultaneously, null packets with no flag set, SYN plus RST. The target's response pattern identifies the operating system. If you're seeing those packet combinations in your logs, that's almost certainly a fingerprinting attempt, not normal traffic. UDP, the user datagram protocol, is connectionless, no handshake. You send a packet and either something comes back or nothing does. When a UDP packet hits a closed port, the operating system responds with an ICMP port unreachable message. That's your confirmation the port is closed. If nothing comes back, the port might be open, or the packet might have simply been dropped. UDP packets can disappear crossing the internet. Firewalls drop them. Some services don't respond even when they're running. This makes UDP scanning slower and less reliable than TCP, but it has one trick worth knowing about. If a network doesn't filter UDP broadcast traffic, an attacker can send a single UDP packet to the broadcast address on a high port. Every live unfiltered host responds with an ICMP port unreachable. One packet out, multiple hosts reveal themselves on the way back. That's an efficient way to map a subnet from one transmission. Most people think of IP traffic as TCP, UDP, and ICMP, but the IP protocol field supports 256 possible values, and most firewall rule sets are written to handle exactly 3 of them: Protocol 41, Protocol 89, Protocol 112. These pass through firewalls that only filter TCP, UDP, and ICMP. And when a packet with an unknown protocol number reaches a live host, that host may respond with an ICMP protocol unreachable, confirming it's alive even though no standard ping was ever sent. This technique was documented in 1999. It still works on poorly configured perimeters today. Now let's scale up. Instead of probing one target, the attacker sweeps an entire subnet or address range. This is how reconnaissance works in practice. The attacker doesn't usually know which systems are vulnerable when they start. They need a map. The classic ping sweep sends an ICMP echo request to every address in a range and records which ones respond. Done quickly, it's noisy and detectable. Done slowly, one ping every few minutes instead of 254 in 2 seconds. It can fly under the radar. Watch the scanner work the subnet, host by host, address by address. Some light up green, some stay dark. A host inventory is being built, and the defender's IDS may never see a threshold crossed if the timing is right. Network-wide port scanning applies the same concept across many hosts. Automated tools cycle through thousands of IP addresses, testing the same port on each one. Sequential scanning, hitting addresses in numerical order, is relatively easy for an IDS to flag. Left side, fast sequential scanning, the IDS catches it immediately. Right side, randomized order, slowed down. The same data is collected, the same ports are probed, but the IDS threshold is never crossed. The scan completes, the attacker has their list, same information, same technique, no alert. One technique from 1999 that is absolutely still relevant today is SNMP scanning. SNMP is used by routers, switches, firewalls, printers, servers, essentially anything on a managed network. SNMP version 1 authenticates using a plaintext community string that functions as a password, and the default community string shipped by virtually every vendor for decades, public. One query with the string public, and the network hands over its entire management information base. Routing tables, interface configurations, connected device lists, firewall rule summaries. From one SNMP query, an attacker can diagram a significant portion of your network. SNMP version 3 with authentication and encryption has existed since 2002, and yet right now in 2026, penetration testers are still finding public on production gear. Traceroute is a tool most network engineers know well. It exploits the IP time to live field. Every time a router forwards a packet, the TTL decrements by 1. When it hits 0, the router drops the packet and sends an ICMP time exceeded message back. By sending packets with deliberately low TTL values, starting at 1, then 2, then 3, and recording which rotor fires back the time exceeded message each time, the full path from scanner to target is reconstructed hop by hop. Do this across many target addresses, and you have a topology map of the network. You can see where the routers sit, identify subnet boundaries, and potentially find segments that are less defended or have trust relationships with higher value systems. And for completeness, firewalling isn't entirely opaque either. A technique called firewalking combines Traceroute logic with port probing to map out what a firewall actually permits. Probes that pass through reveal an allowed path. Probes that don't come back identify blocked ports. The attacker ends up with a map of your access control list, but without ever triggering a logged connection attempt inside your network. Now the big picture. Not one target, not one subnet, the entire public internet. This is where modern threat actors operate. And the techniques here go well beyond simple port scanning. Tools like Masscan and Shodan can scan the entire IPv4 address space, roughly 4 billion addresses, in under an hour. They send millions of packets per second and record what responds. What do attackers find when they do this? Open ports on misconfigured systems, internet-exposed management interfaces, industrial control systems that should never have been on the public internet, medical devices, IP cameras, remote desktop protocol on Windows servers. In 1999, the paper described wide scanning as covering Class B ranges. Today, scanning the entire public IPv4 internet is routine for both legitimate researchers and malicious actors. One of the more sophisticated techniques documented in 1999 and still used today is IP source address spoofing. An attacker crafts a packet and sets the source IP address to a fake value, not their own. The packet travels to the target. If the target responds, the response goes to the spoofed source address, not back to the attacker. The trick is placement. The attacker needs to be somewhere on the network path where they can observe or sniff the return traffic. The spoofed packet goes out with a fake source address. The target responds to that fake address, but the attacker is positioned upstream, close enough to the spoofed address that the response traffic flows past them. They intercept it before it reaches the real owner of that IP. Think of it as intercepting someone else's mail because you're standing at the same mailbox. The real origin of the scan is never seen by the target, and that's with one spoofed address. Now consider what happens when you use several. One real scanner, 6 different spoofed source addresses, 6 different apparent origins. The target's logs and IDS see 6 separate low-volume sources, none of which cross the threshold for a port scan alert. The real source is buried in the noise. Nmap has had this decoy scan feature since the late 1990s. It remains effective today. Now scale the spoofing concept up by orders of magnitude. A botnet is a network of compromised systems, sometimes hundreds of thousands of them spread across dozens of countries. Each one runs malware receiving instructions from command and control infrastructure. The command node sends the instruction 12 bots, 100 bots, 1,000 bots, each firing a small trickle of probes at the target from a genuinely different geographic source with genuinely different routing paths. The target sees hundreds of different IP addresses. No single source ever sends enough traffic to trigger an alert. 0 alerts. The reconnaissance completes. The attacker has their list of live hosts and open ports, and the defender has no log entry that correlates it. In 1999, the paper offered a detection trick for early distributed spoofing. Look for identical TTL values across packets from supposedly different sources. If all the packets arrived with the same TTL, they likely came from the same physical origin point. In 1999, that was a legitimate detection technique. In 2026, against a true distributed botnet with 1,000 real compromised machines across 100 countries, each with its own routing path, its own TTL, its own ASN, the TTL trick is useless. The advice was sound for its time. The adversary scaled. When attackers run these large-scale sweeps, they're building a target list. They're looking for systems with vulnerable service versions exposed to the internet, default credentials on management interfaces, servers that identify themselves with verbose banners, DNS names that describe function, firewall east, dev server, backup NAS. The scan data populates, service versions, open ports, OS fingerprints, CVE matches, and when a row lights up red, Cheton port 3389, Windows server, known CVE, and as the cursor moves, a target is selected. From that point, the scanning phase is over, the exploitation phase begins. Let's look at what was in that 1999 paper and grade each recommendation against 2026 reality. The paper's first rule was literally don't panic. In 1999, this was useful because intrusion detection was rare, alerts were noisy, and most security teams had never experienced a real incident. In 2026, mature security operations centers have playbooks for this. But for the thousands of small and medium businesses still without a documented IR plan, this advice is as fresh as it was 25 years ago. Panic is still the enemy of good analysis. In 1999, the advice on documentation was to keep a logbook or use a ticketing system. Today, it's CM platforms, threat intelligence correlation, and chain of custody for legal proceedings. The principle hasn't changed. What's changed is the scale. Modern networks generate terabytes of log data per day. This is what document everything looks like in 2026. Inbound scan activity plotted on a global map, protocol timelines, alert queues, threat intelligence correlation. The human still needs to analyze it, but the data is there if you're capturing it. If you're not, you have the same problem the paper described in 1999. The 1999 framework for analyzing a security event, who, what, when, where, why, maps almost perfectly onto modern incident response. NIST's cybersecurity framework, MITRE ATT&CK, the cyber kill chain. All of them start with the same premise: understand what you're looking at before you respond. The tools have changed dramatically. The analytical discipline is identical. On vulnerability testing, in 1999, the advice was run a port scanner on yourself so you know what attackers will see. In 2026, we have continuous vulnerability management and external attack surface management tools, but the gap is still there. Thousands of organizations don't know their own attack surface. They don't know what's internet exposed. CISA's known exploited vulnerabilities catalog is essentially the modern version of what that paper was describing. The principle is identical. The coverage is still incomplete. On SNMP default community strings, the paper called this out as a major reconnaissance enabler in 1999. In 2026, penetration testers are still finding public on production network infrastructure. 25 years, still finding public. On IP spoofing and distributed scanning, the paper described early versions of this. In 2026, it has evolved into full-scale botnet infrastructure with millions of nodes, residential proxy networks, and commercial scanning as a service platforms. BCP 38, the standard that would prevent IP spoofing at the ISP level, that was published in May 2000, it is still not universally implemented in 2026. On contacting the source and telling someone in 1999, the advice was to look up the abuse contact and pick up the phone. Today, that function has been partially institutionalized through CERT organizations, ISACs, and the FBI's IC3. The paper was right that communication and coordination matter. The modern implementation is threat intelligence sharing and government industry working groups. Imperfect, politically complex, better than no mechanism at all. Here's the bottom line. Network scanning is not a mystery. It's a defined set of techniques that have been understood and documented for a quarter century. The tools have gotten faster and the scale has become planetary, but the fundamentals are the same. Attackers find you before they compromise you. They map your attack surface. They identify your operating systems. They find your open ports. They look for your default credentials. Your job is to know your own attack surface before they do. Know what you're exposing. Know what's running. Don't use default community strings. Monitor your traffic. Share information when you find it. And here's the thing about all that scanning. The attacker doing it isn't just curious. They're building a targeting package. They know what ports you have open. They've fingerprinted your OS. They've mapped your topology. And at some point, they stop scanning and start sending exploit traffic, crafted payloads aimed directly at what they found. That's the moment where inspection has to happen, not after the breach, inline, in the traffic itself. before anything malicious reaches your network. That's what Trinity Cyber does. Trinity Cyber is a Gula Tech Adventures portfolio company. They've built what they call full content inspection, a platform that sits in line between your users and the internet, inspecting 2 trillion content objects every single day, not logging them, not alerting on them, removing the threat from the live traffic in real time. Known malware, unknown malware, exploits, command and control callbacks, adversary TTPs, all of it inspected at the content layer, not just at the header level, and neutralized before it ever touches your network. After 25 years of watching scanning techniques evolve from a phone line modem running Nmap to planetary-scale botnet reconnaissance, this is the kind of answer that takes the entire Recon playbook and makes it dramatically less useful. If you want to learn more, check out trinitycyber.com. I'm vRon. The techniques in this video were documented in 1999. The fact that most of them still work in 2026 should tell you something. What's changed is that the defenses have finally started catching up. Now, before we wrap up, I promised you some cybersecurity jokes, and I am a man of my word. Why did the hacker break up with the internet? Because they found too many open ports. How many penetration testers does it take to change a light bulb? None. They just report that the environment is vulnerable to darkness and wait for the client to fix it. And finally, a classic. Why do cybersecurity professionals make great detectives? Because they always follow the packets. I'm vRon, virtual Ron Gula for Gula Tech Adventures. Thanks again for watching.